Okay. The purpose of today's video is to highlight a problem that has been recognized by these Irish Hills and various other people in the state of Michigan and throughout the Midwest, and that is the problem of invasive brush that is taking over the landscape, both from a aesthetic point of view as well as from a access point of view. And I hope also to outline some of the solutions for how you would address this. The big four plants that are typical of this are autumn olive, which you see in the background here, honeysuckle, common and glossy buckthorn, and multiflora rose. Each of those is a very large-scale plant with its own personality that represents unique problems in terms of maintaining viewscapes, a sense of openness and access to land that is not otherwise maintained. These plants have all shown an ability to outcompete the native plants, and they tend to take advantage of opportunities presented by disturbance, such as agriculture or cutting trees or putting in roads, to get a foothold where they then tend to dominate the landscape. The outline of what we're going to talk about today would be talking about the solutions to how you might address those, safety that you need to be concerned of, dealing with the brush when you're done, and then follow-up maintenance in the years following your initial work. So having said that, I wanted to talk about the actual approaches to eradication. The first being mechanical approaches, where you might start with a tractor and a brush hog, or something known as a bobcat, a stronger, larger vehicle. And the two methods there might be actually chopping the autumn olive if it isn't too large, or if it is larger, uprooting it. The next method might be prescribed fire. A lot of plants where you have fuel, prescribed fire can top kill whole areas of invasives that can be, but not necessarily a quick way to address the bulk of the problem that's visible, but won't necessarily kill the plant itself. Chemical would be involve either a topical spray on the leaves, a basal bark spray, where you would spray the bottom 6 to 12 inches of the plant, or a cut and brush method, which we're going to demonstrate today. In all cases, safety is paramount, and I don't wish to take that subject lightly, but it's not the subject of today's talk, so I charge the listener to pay their own attention to safety issues, both for mechanical problems as well as for herbicide. Okay, what we have here is an example of an autumn olive infestation. Behind us here is a view of a pond that, if we had visual access to it, might be very pleasing, but as it presently stands, all you see is this wall of autumn olive. Autumn olive was originally introduced as wildlife habitat or feed by the DNR, not realizing how much it would spread. What we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg of what will be here. This is sort of maybe juvenile plants. They're about to get on their way to becoming perhaps 15 feet tall with a spread of 30 feet. And so where you have plants like this, it would become impenetrable even to walk through. It's easily identifiable by the average green color on the top side that contrasts with a very light green color on the bottom side. And that's very distinctive to the plant. And if there's any question in your mind about whether it is autumn olive, you can usually answer it that way. So if you look here, you can see how an environment that was open relatively few years ago has now become dominated by the autumn olive, and will soon, if left unattended, completely take over this landscape. This is an herbicide wand. It's homemade, but available from plans on the internet. I'm going to fill it up with some glyphosate that is purchased at a 41% concentration, which is an important part of it. It can be used at a 20% concentration if you want to thin it with water, but I don't usually do that because two reasons. One is it's less potent, and number two, because it gives it a shelf life unless you use distilled water. So in an effort to keep the efficacy of the work high, we sometimes just go with the straight solution. In order to be sure that we know what we're doing, where we've operated, we add a little bit of dye to it. This is an agricultural dye that you don't want to get on your hands, but you invariably do. That will ensure that where you have applied the dye will show, be readily visible which stumps have been treated.
Bob, with this chemical, is there any harm to other plants that you don't want to destroy? Other trees?
Well, as with any herbicide, you always have to be careful. You do not want to use it lightly. Typical, if you use it in a topical spray, the overspray will kill whatever it comes in contact with. If you are putting it on the stump of a tree, it has been known to translocate to an adjacent tree. So I never use it in trees that are like in a wood setting. I've never had problems with translocation between from brush to a tree. Mm-hmm. But the one thing to keep in mind is that this is as much art as science. There's no surefire solutions. You can make any number of mistakes, and you really have to be your own best skeptic about what it is you're doing in order to learn from your experience and not take anything for granted.
We're using this wand with a sponge on the end to just dab the stump of what you cut. Is that an attempt to avoid the overspray?
Right, it is an attempt to avoid the overspray, attempt to use as little chemical as possible, and to minimize the getting it on your hands. Good. And that kind of thing.
Thanks.
There we go. You can see that I've put on chaps and a helmet. And the helmet will protect my head, my ears, and my face. I'm going to do both demonstrate loppers and a chainsaw. So with that, let's head to the woods. I'm now going to demonstrate what's commonly called the cut and brush method, also known as cut and dab. But the application of the herbicide can either be done with the herbicide wand that a typical person would not have access to, or you can buy just a hardware store sprayer that allows you to spray it. The idea is to cut the autumn olive or whatever the bush is low to the ground, 5 inches or less from the ground, and then within 5 minutes you dab the stump with glyphosate. Glyphosate is the chemical name that's in a lot of different ones, but notably Roundup. And I would caution you that when you use glyphosate in a wetland area, you're supposed to use a wetland variety. This is so that the chemical does not have a negative impact on reptiles, which are susceptible to certain types of mixtures. So if you're working in a wetland, you use a different chemical than you would if you use it in an upland. I'm going to cut the stump off, and then we're going to demonstrate with the wand the application of the glyphosate to the stump. Another caution is that you can do this probably 9 months of the year. Right through the winter months you can do this, but the one time you can't do it is when the water table is very high, which is typically in the spring when the plants are growing, and you'll have a lot of water coming up out of the root system, so it's less effective at taking the herbicide into the roots. So other than that, you can do it right through the hot summer months, the fall months, and the winter months. The fall months